It's time to delve into the first video game system I ever played, the 1985 Nintendo Entertainment System, third generation console. Let us begin with a little history. The year was 1983, and a terrible thing was happening to the video game industry. The crash was caused by a lot of issues. There was low pay and no recognition of the programmers. There were a lot of Generation 2 consoles flooding the market. In addition to that, personal computers were also becoming more common. And a side note, computers, like video games, were said to be a fad. Nice prediction there. It's not like we see computers everywhere in practically every facet of our lives. But the biggest cause in the video game crash of 1983 was no quality control in game design. There were companies springing up all over manufacturing crappy video games, and they knew it. There was no lockout chip or legal protections for console manufacturers. Everyone and their grandmother was making cheap old games. From Activision to frickin' dog food companies. They seemed like an easy way to make money, so the market was flooded with these games made for the Atari 2600, and Atari did not get a red cent for any of them. Atari could have kept their loyal following if they had kept their own quality control, but two royal failed flushes of thoughtless, rushed last-minute games bankrupted Atari and nearly ruined the video game industry in North America. I'm talking about none other than the nauseating visuals and migraine-inducing sound effects of the Pac-Man port, and the confusing, ugly, short-sighted, pathetic cash grab attempt that is E.T. the video game. Enter Nintendo. You may have noticed that the Nintendo looks very different from its Japanese version, the Famicom, or Family Computer, and other third-generation consoles. There is a very good reason for that. The American Nintendo was designed to resemble a front-loader VCR. It's also the reason it was not marketed with the phrase video game console in its name.
Look, America, it's our new family entertainment system. Cool. It comes with Rob, the robotic operating buddy. Ooh, and a light gun. Interesting. And, you can play games on it. So it's a video game home entertainment system! But it looks like you have home entertainment system! But play it! Okay! Die! Hey! Shut up, you stupid dog! It's hard!
And so the video game industry was saved thanks to this gray and beige box.
Thank you, Nintendo, for paving the way to wasting thousands of my dollars and literally months of hours of my life.
Now, on to the technical details. The Nintendo Entertainment System has an 8-bit single-core 1.66 MHz processor. 8-bit processors have an 8-bit data bus and therefore can only access 8 bits of data per machine clock tick, compared to modern 64-bit processors that can access, you guessed it, 64 bits of data per clock tick. It also means that 8-bit processors can only map to 2 to the 8th power addresses. But there are more differences in the way that old processors handle tasks. Inside your computer, there is something called a short-term scheduler. Every burst cycle, the scheduler takes a look at the processes that have been waiting and decides what order to allow them to access the CPU. The order is determined by an algorithm. That algorithm may simply allow them to finish in the order they entered the queue. It may decide based on how long a process has been waiting, the size of the process, or a combination of these. Modern programs are now able to be divided into multiple processes, allowing them to have multiple spots in the queue. Thanks to multi-core processors, a process can be broken down into multiple threads that can run at the same time on different cores. If you have a 64-bit quad-core processor, instead of one process operating at 64 bits per clock cycle, you can have 4 threads operating at 16 bits per clock cycle. So besides being much slower than new processors, the NES's could only handle one task at a time. In my Nintendo cartridge dissection NES video, I made a quick comparison to the NES processor and my quad-core i5 by simply stating the ratio of the processor speeds. As I described above, the differences between the processors is much more complex. In fact, I have only just scratched the surface. I had started to write a more accurate description, but I decided I wanted to save all of that for this video, so I just put the number there. YouTube user Sven Hesse called me out on that, and rightfully so, because it was grossly inaccurate.
Moving on to the what was I gonna say? Oh yeah! Memory! The RAM!
The Nintendo has only 2 kilobytes of base RAM. It also had another 2 kilobytes for use for the system's picture processing unit, 256 bytes to hold a list of sprites, and 28 tiny bytes to hold the color palette. As I showed in the cartridge dissection, some games came with extra RAM. This allowed games with RAM to load more content and colors than a game without RAM. It allowed game manufacturers to create more complex and vibrant games and to stay on par with the technology of superior contemporary systems like the Sega Master and the Atari 7800. There is a second processor that I mentioned earlier called a picture processing unit, which runs at a rate of 5.37 MHz. The video output is created in 2 layers, the background texture and the sprite layer. This is why when you play the Nintendo on a widescreen television, which the console was obviously not designed for, the background texture fills out the size of the picture. 64 sprites can be displayed normally in one frame without having to constantly reload them. But there is a way that more sprites can be displayed, although this causes a flicker as they are cycled through. They have to take turns on the screen. Finally, the colors. All the colors! The NES has only 48 different colors and 8 shades of gray. That's it. Here's a fun fact. Mega Man was originally going to be red, but because there are 5 shades of blue, but only 3 shades of red, he was redesigned. The original concept of Mega Man was recycled into his older brother robot, Proto Man. The Japanese Famicom has a port on the front for the purpose of possible additional peripherals. The expansion slot was redesigned and moved to the bottom of the NES. It was never used and covered by a plastic shield. I'm kind of glad nothing became of it because I have a hard time imagining what could have been inserted into the bottom of the console. Now, it might be hard to think of this monatomic beeping 2-dimensional 8-bit box as being a technological leap, but it had some significant improvements over the capabilities of the second generation 8-bit consoles. There was no PPU. There was hardware support for a single background texture and 2 sprites. The picture processing unit allowed for the use of scrolling backgrounds vertically as well as horizontally. Previously, it was required to replace the content of the screen all at once. It also improved the way sprites were painted. 2 generational consoles could only use single color sprites. That's why we have things like magenta AT-ATs and lime green aliens and tan rapists. If you don't mind your sprites looking identical, it was possible to duplicate them, but the Atari could only show 2 different sprites at once. And now it's time for the saddest part of this video, the design flaws.
As any 80s and 90s gamer would know, after a few years an aging NES starts to do some really annoying things.
The cause of these issues were the copper pins on the cartridges, which tarnished in the presence of oxygen, and the 72-pin connector, which bent due to the way the games are inserted. Ever wonder why you have to push the cartridge bay down into the system to get it to work? Unlike the Famicom, the Super Nintendo, and the Nintendo 64, the Nintendo did not use a true zero-force insertion connector. Here's me demonstrating on this Nintendo with the cartridge bay and upper casing removed. Pressing down on the bay and locking it into position presses the cartridge pins against the connector prongs, eventually bending them. The combination of the bent prongs and the tarnished pins caused loss of signal integrity, resulting in freezing, displaying weird data, or just a blank gray screen. Oh, and don't blow on your games or put alcohol in them, it just makes them age faster. If there's a lot of dust on the pins, some compressed air will help. There are also NES cleaning kits available. Also, there are replacement 72-pin slots available online for cheap. Nintendo learned from past mistakes of other companies and took precautions from unlicensed third-party games by installing a lockout chip called the 10NES. If there was not a cartridge with the correct pin to change the lockout chip from the lock setting to the key setting, the NES would turn on and off once per second. With the aging connector pins, the chip was sometimes inappropriately set to the lock, even when the rest of the game loads correctly. However, this chip can be overridden by simply cutting off one of its pins so that the chip is always set to key.
Now, since I've had my precious Nintendo since I was 6 years old, and I don't wish to damage it in any way, I'm not going to do that. So instead, here's a video of some guy doing it.
That chip, right there, that's the one that we care about. I know it's blurry because this camera really sucks, but you can see that there's a series of metal pins below that chip. You'll see there's one small one all the way to the left. Make sure you count that. That's the first one. Second, third, fourth. In my case, the chip says 1986 Nintendo 8742. It's right underneath the 2. You must take something like a screwdriver, whatever, and just kind of get underneath and pop it back. Now, I'm not going to do that on camera because just due to the angling of the camera, it's going to be way too hard to wedge under that, but I will show you what it looks like when it's done. But trust me, this is actually relatively easy. Okay, I've gone ahead and disabled it. You can see there's a gap there now, so you count 3 and then a blank, and then it keeps going. I just, here it is. This little stupid metal piece is what causes that problem. So what I did was I just took a flathead screwdriver, I just kind of wedged it under and just worked it around until it popped off. Just be careful not to pop off these other things, because that could be catastrophic. So now we're going to go ahead and put it back together.
Thanks, some guy. That was really great.
That's all the time I have for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Please like and subscribe. If I get enough interest, maybe I will start my own Patreon account so I can afford to put more time and money into this channel. See you next time. Whoa!